My sister forced me to burn everything our parents left behind just hours after we buried them. But when my father's coat slipped from my hands, something fell into the snow that changed everything. And the most terrifying part? I realized she never intended for me to find it. My name is Meredith. I work as a junior interior designer in Chicago. Nothing glamorous, just long hours, quiet projects, and a life that used to feel small but safe. I'm not the kind of person who seeks out conflict. I avoid it, soften it, reshape it, just like I do with rooms that feel too sharp or too empty. But this story, this isn't something I designed. It's something I survived. And it all began on the coldest day of my life, not because of the weather, but because of what my sister asked me to do. We had just come back from the funeral. The sky was a dull, endless gray, and the wind off Lake Michigan cut through the backyard like it was trying to erase everything it touched. I was still wearing the same black coat from the service, my fingers numb, my mind drifting somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. People always say grief comes in waves, but in that moment, it didn't feel like waves. It felt like silence, until Karen broke it. "Start burning it," she said. I turned slowly, thinking I must have misheard her. But she was already standing by the old rusted metal drum at the far end of the yard, where dry wood crackled inside a growing fire. The flames were alive, greedy, already reaching upward like they knew what was coming. "What?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. Karen didn't look at me at first. She was checking her watch, her expression tight with impatience. "All of it," she clarified, finally meeting my eyes. "Clothes, personal things, anything sentimental. I want this place cleared before sunset." My chest tightened. "We just buried them." "And?" she snapped, her tone sharp enough to slice through whatever was left of my composure. "This house needs to be prepared. I don't have time to deal with your emotions." There it was, the word she always used like it was something shameful. Emotions. I looked down at the large plastic bin sitting at my feet. Inside were pieces of my parents' lives, my mother's dresses, my father's old sweaters, scarves, gloves, things they had touched, worn, lived in, things that still carried them. "This isn't right," I whispered, more to myself than to her. Karen exhaled loudly, like I was wasting her time. "Meredith, stop being dramatic. They're gone. These are just objects." Just objects. I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in my throat. There was no arguing with her, not really. There never had been. Karen had always been like this, efficient, decisive, cold in a way that people mistook for strength. But this felt different. This felt like erasing them. "Do it," she said again, her voice lower now, more dangerous. "Or I'll do it myself, and I won't be gentle about it." That was all it took. I bent down, picked up the first armful of clothes, and walked toward the fire. The heat hit my face immediately, sharp and overwhelming, a cruel contrast to the freezing air around me. I hesitated for just a second, just long enough to recognize my mother's favorite floral dress in the pile. She used to wear it every spring, always saying it made her feel like the world was starting over. My fingers tightened around the fabric. Then I threw it into the flames. The fire swallowed it instantly, the colors curling, darkening, disappearing. Something inside me cracked, but I didn't let it show. I kept going. One by one, I fed the fire. A scarf, a sweater, a pair of gloves. Each piece vanished faster than the last, as if the flames were growing more confident, more certain of their purpose. Behind me, I could feel Karen watching, not grieving, not remembering, just watching, as if this was a task to complete, a checklist to finish. My hands trembled as the pile grew smaller. My breath came out in uneven bursts, visible in the cold air. I tried not to think about what I was doing, tried to treat it like Karen did, just objects, just things. But then I reached the last item, my father's coat. It was heavier than everything else, thick gray wool, worn at the edges from years of use. I had seen him wear it every winter, hands tucked into the pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. It still smelled faintly like him, like cedarwood and something warm I couldn't quite name. I held it against my chest without realizing I had stopped moving. "Don't," Karen said sharply from behind me. "Don't start that again." I didn't turn around. "It's just one thing." "No." Her voice was firm, final. "We're not keeping anything. That's the point." I closed my eyes. For a moment, the world felt very small. Just me, the coat, and the fire waiting in front of me. "I just need a second," I whispered. "You've had enough seconds," she replied coldly. "Throw it in." Something in her tone made it clear this wasn't just about cleaning out a house. This was about control. I opened my eyes slowly, my vision blurring with unshed tears. I leaned forward, lifting the coat with both hands, forcing myself to let go. "I'm sorry," I murmured under my breath, and then I threw it. But before the coat could reach the fire, something slipped free from the inner pocket. It fell fast, cutting through the air, and landed in the snow at my feet with a solid, unmistakable thud. I froze. For a second, I didn't even breathe. Then I looked down. A small black digital voice recorder lay there, half buried in the snow. A tiny red light blinked steadily on its surface. Recording. My heart slammed against my ribs. No, that didn't make sense. My father hated technology. He barely used a phone, let alone something like this. I had never seen him with a recorder. So why was it in his coat? And more importantly, why was it still on? Behind me, I heard Karen shift. "What's taking so long?" she demanded. My instincts kicked in before my thoughts could catch up. Without bending down, without hesitating, I used the tip of my boot to drag a layer of snow over the device, covering it completely. "Nothing," I said quickly, forcing my voice to stay steady. The wind just... Karen stepped closer, her boots crunching against the frozen ground. I could feel her eyes on me, sharp, searching. For a moment, I thought she might see it, that she might notice something was wrong. But then she scoffed. "You've always been slow at everything," she muttered. "Finish it. I'm going inside. You have 20 minutes. The back door opened, then closed behind her with a heavy, final sound. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was alive. I dropped to my knees in the snow the second I knew she was gone, my hands digging frantically until my fingers closed around cold plastic. I pulled the recorder free, brushing off the snow, my breath coming fast and uneven. The red light was still blinking, still recording. I stared at it, my mind racing. Whatever this was, it wasn't an accident. And deep down, beneath the shock and confusion, one terrifying thought began to form. Karen didn't want this found. I shoved the recorder deep into my coat pocket, my heart pounding louder than the wind, louder than the fire still burning behind me. And without looking back, without even grabbing the rest of the things I was supposed to take, I ran. Because in that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. The fire wasn't just meant to destroy memories. It was meant to destroy the truth. And somehow, I had just saved it. I don't remember most of the drive back to my apartment. I remember the road was slick with thin ice, and I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned pale. But everything in between felt like fragments, streetlights stretching into lines, headlights flashing past like warnings I couldn't interpret. Every few seconds, I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Karen's car behind me, her headlights cutting through the dark like she somehow already knew what I had taken. My heart didn't slow down until I reached my building. Even then, it didn't feel like safety. It felt like a temporary pause. I rushed up the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, my boots echoing too loudly in the narrow hallway. When I finally got inside my apartment, I locked the door, then locked it again, and then leaned my forehead against the wood as if that thin barrier could keep everything out: the cold, the fire, and whatever truth was now sitting in my coat pocket. For a long moment, I didn't move. The silence inside the apartment pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that makes you aware of every small sound, your breath, your heartbeat, the faint hum of electricity in the walls. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the recorder. It looked smaller now than it had in the snow, harmless even. Just a cheap black device with a blinking red light that had finally gone still. But I knew better. I sat down on the floor instead of the couch, like my legs didn't trust themselves to hold me up anymore. The recorder rested in my hands, cold and unfamiliar. I turned it over, searching for some kind of explanation, some clue that would make this make sense. There wasn't one, and that scared me more than anything. I knew I should press play. I knew that whatever answers existed were inside that device. But my thumb hovered over the button, frozen, because once I listened, there would be no going back. No pretending, no softening the edges of reality. I couldn't do it alone. The thought came to me suddenly, urgently, like instinct. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed the only person I trusted enough to hear whatever was waiting with me. Janice. She answered on the second ring. Meredith? What's wrong? I didn't realize I was crying until I tried to speak. The words came out broken, tangled with panic and disbelief. I found something. At the house. I don't know what it is, but it's not right. Nothing about this is right. There was a brief pause, and then her voice shifted, steady, focused. I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there, okay? I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Okay. The 20 minutes it took her to arrive felt longer than the entire drive home. I paced the apartment, clutching the recorder, replaying the moment it fell from my father's coat over and over again in my head. It didn't feel random anymore. It felt intentional, like something placed there, waiting. When the knock finally came, I rushed to open the door. Janice stood there, slightly out of breath, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, her coat thrown on in a hurry. She didn't ask questions right away. She just stepped inside and closed the door behind her, her eyes scanning my face like she was trying to assess how bad things really were. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said quietly. Maybe I have, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I led her to the couch, and we sat down side by side. I placed the recorder on the coffee table between us, as if putting it at a distance might make it less dangerous. Janice leaned forward slightly, studying it. This is what you found? I nodded. In Dad's coat. It fell out when I was about to burn it. Her eyebrows knit together. Your dad didn't use things like this, did he? No, I said immediately. Never. That's why this doesn't make any sense. Janice was quiet for a moment, then she reached over and took my hand. Her grip was firm, grounding. Whatever this is, he wanted it to be found. The words settled over me slowly. Wanted it to be found. I hadn't let myself think that far yet, because if that was true, then this wasn't just a coincidence. It was a message. My chest tightened. I'm scared to listen. I know, she said softly, but not knowing won't make it better. I swallowed hard, staring at the recorder like it might move on its own. Then, before I could lose my nerve, I reached out and pressed the play button. For a second, nothing happened. Then a burst of static filled the room, sharp and sudden, making both of us flinch. The sound crackled, uneven, like the recording itself was struggling to hold together. And then a cough, ragged, weak, familiar. My entire body went still. My voice broke. That's Dad. Janice squeezed my hand tighter, but neither of us spoke again. We just listened. There was a rustling sound, like papers being moved. Then Karen's voice cut through the static, clear, controlled, unmistakable. Just sign the papers, Dad. I'm tired of waiting. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't just hearing her voice. It was the tone. Cold, impatient, almost bored. I need my medicine, my father said, his voice trembling, strained in a way I had never heard before. Karen, please. My chest. My hand flew to my mouth. No, I whispered, shaking my head, as if I could deny what I was hearing. Karen didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. That made it worse. You'll get it after you sign, she replied calmly. Power of attorney, the accounts, everything. It's all standard. Standard. The word echoed in my head like something obscene. I can't breathe, my father gasped. Please. There was another rustle of paper, sharper this time, followed by the sound of something being pushed across a surface. "If you don't sign this right now," Karen continued, her tone still frighteningly composed, "I'm walking out that door, and I'm taking the medication with me." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Janice's grip tightened, but I barely registered it. All I could hear was my father's breathing, shallow, uneven, desperate. Then the faint scratch of a pen, slow, unsteady, like every movement cost him something. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away from the recorder, even though the real scene was playing out in my mind with horrifying clarity. The sound of the pen stopped. A chair scraped. Footsteps. Then a door slamming shut. And finally, silence. Except it wasn't silence. It was the quiet, broken sound of my father crying. The recording clicked off. The room felt heavier than before, like the air itself had changed. I stared straight ahead, my vision blurred, my chest tight with something too large to name. Grief had been heavy before, but this was something else. This was anger. This was betrayal. This was the realization that my father hadn't just died. He had been forced into something, cornered, pressured in his weakest moment, and the person who had done it was my sister. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. How could anyone? Janice exhaled slowly, her expression no longer just concerned, but sharp, focused. "This isn't just cruelty, Meredith. This is calculated." I looked at her, my thoughts racing. She said power of attorney. That means she had control, Janice finished. Over his medical decisions, his finances, everything. My stomach twisted. "So she could decide whether he got his medication or not," I whispered. Janice nodded grimly, and she used that control to force him to sign. The pieces started to come together in a way that made me feel sick. The sudden change in the will, the urgency, the way Karen had pushed to clear out the house so quickly, the way she watched me burn everything without a second thought. She wasn't grieving. She was covering her tracks. A cold wave of realization washed over me. "She didn't just neglect him," I said slowly. She used his condition against him. Janice didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. The truth was already there, sitting between us, undeniable. I looked down at the recorder again, my hands trembling. "This isn't enough, is it?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Janice hesitated. "It's powerful," she said carefully. "But on its own, she could argue it was taken out of context, or manipulated, or that he was confused." My chest tightened again. So even with this, she could still win? Janice met my eyes, her expression steady. "Only if we stop here." Something shifted inside me then. Fear was still there, heavy and suffocating. But beneath it, something else began to take shape. Determination. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, my breath unsteady but stronger than before. "She's not getting away with this," I said quietly. Janice gave a small nod. "Then we need more. Evidence, motive, witnesses, anything that connects what we just heard to what actually happened." I looked around my apartment, the safe, quiet space that suddenly felt like the center of something much bigger. This wasn't just about grief anymore. This was about truth. And if the truth was buried, then I was going to dig it up, no matter what it took. The next morning, the sky over Michigan hung low and heavy, the kind of gray that presses down on you before the day even begins. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again, my father's voice, weak and desperate, and Karen's voice, calm and cold, like she was negotiating a business deal instead of holding a man's life in her hands. By the time I got into my car, I already knew where I was going. Mr. Whitmore's office. He had been my parents' lawyer for over 30 years. He had known them before I was born, had sat at our kitchen table more times than I could count, laughing with my father over coffee and listening patiently to my mother's stories. If there was anyone who might still be on our side, someone who would see through whatever Karen had done, it had to be him. The drive downtown felt longer than it should have. The streets were slick with a thin layer of rain, and the windshield wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm that did nothing to calm my thoughts. I kept replaying the recording in my mind, as if I needed to memorize every word, every pause, every breath, because somehow I knew that wouldn't be enough. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of the brick building where his office was located, my hands lingered on the steering wheel for a moment longer than necessary. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and stepped out into the cold drizzle. Inside, everything felt the same and completely different at the same time. The receptionist looked up as I entered, her expression softening immediately. "Meredith, I'm so sorry for your loss." I nodded, forcing a small, polite smile. "Thank you." But there was something in her eyes, something heavier than sympathy. It made my stomach tighten. She didn't make me wait. Within minutes, I was being ushered into Mr. Whitmore's office. He was sitting behind his large mahogany desk, just like always. The shelves behind him were lined with thick legal books, the same ones I used to run my fingers across as a child when I visited with my parents. The room smelled faintly of paper and polish, familiar and comforting. But his face wasn't. He looked older. Not just in the way time naturally changes someone, but in the way worry settles into a person's features and refuses to leave. "Meredith," he said gently as I stepped inside, "please, have a seat." I sat down, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, waiting for him to say something, anything that would make this easier. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't offer coffee. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a thick document bound in a blue legal folder. Slowly, deliberately, he placed it on the desk in front of me and slid it across the polished surface. My heart sank before I even touched it. "What is this?" I asked, even though part of me already knew. His voice was quiet, measured. "Your father signed a new will 3 days before he passed." The words hit me like a physical blow. "No," I said immediately, shaking my head. "That's not possible. He would never. He always said everything would be split equally between me and Karen." Mr. Whitmore sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose, as if the conversation itself exhausted him. "I advised him against making such a drastic change so close to the end," he admitted. But he was insistent. Insistent. The word echoed in my mind, clashing violently with the memory of my father's voice on that recording. I opened the folder with trembling hands. The legal language blurred together at first, but one thing was painfully clear. The lakefront house, the majority of the investments, the control of the estate, everything had been transferred to Karen. Everything. My chest tightened as my eyes moved to the bottom of the page. The signature. It was my father's, but barely. The lines were shaky, uneven, as if his hand had been fighting against something: pain, weakness, fear. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "This isn't right," I whispered. "Look at it. He wasn't okay when he signed this." Mr. Whitmore's expression darkened slightly. "I had my concerns," he admitted. "But legally speaking, the document was properly executed, witnessed, notarized." "Because she forced him," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "I have proof." I reached into my bag, my fingers closing around the recorder. For a moment, I hesitated, like saying it out loud would make it more real. Then I placed it on his desk. "There's a recording," I said, my voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "It's Karen. She threatens him. She withholds his medication until he signs. You can hear everything." Mr. Whitmore didn't touch the device right away. He looked at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair. "A recording like that could be very significant," he said carefully. "But it may not be enough on its own." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He folded his hands together, his tone shifting into something more formal, more legal. "Audio evidence obtained in a private setting, without consent, can be challenged. She could claim it was taken out of context, or that your father was confused due to medication, or even that it was altered." My fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. "But it's the truth." "I don't doubt that," he said softly. "But the court requires more than truth. It requires proof that cannot be reasonably questioned." The words settled heavily in the room. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It felt like standing in front of a locked door after finally finding the key, only to realize the lock had changed. "So what do I do?" I asked quietly. Mr. Whitmore exhaled slowly. "You need corroboration, financial records, witness testimony, anything that supports the claim of coercion or undue influence." My mind raced. Financial records, witnesses. The pieces were there but scattered, incomplete. And time. Time was something I wasn't sure I had. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. I couldn't sit there any longer, couldn't keep staring at that document like it was something I had to accept. "I'm not letting her take everything," I said, more to myself than to him. "Not like this." Mr. Whitmore gave a small, understanding nod. "Then you'll need to act quickly." I gathered my things, slipping the recorder back into my bag, the weight of it feeling heavier now, not just as a secret, but as a responsibility. When I stepped outside, the drizzle had turned into steady rain. I barely noticed. My thoughts were too loud, too tangled, too urgent. I reached my car and pulled the door open, but before I could get inside, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound made me flinch. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. A message from Karen. My chest tightened as I opened it. "You have 24 hours to remove anything you want from the house. After that, I'm hiring a cleaning crew. Whatever's left gets thrown out. No greeting, no explanation, just an order." My grip on the phone tightened, my knuckles turning white. She wasn't just taking the inheritance. She was erasing me. Erasing everything that might connect me to that house, to my parents, to any piece of evidence I hadn't found yet. A cold realization settled over me. She was moving fast, faster than I had expected. Because she knew, maybe not about the recorder specifically, but she knew there were things she needed to get rid of. Things that could expose her. I slid into the driver's seat, closing the door harder than necessary. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the rain streaking down the windshield. I could walk away. I could take what little I had left and try to rebuild something new somewhere else. But the thought of that, of letting her win, of letting my father's last moments be reduced to a signed piece of paper, made something inside me twist painfully. No, I couldn't do that. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. "I'm not done," I whispered to myself. Because now, this wasn't just about grief. It wasn't just about loss. It was about the truth. And if the truth was hidden somewhere in that house, then I was going back to find it. 2 days later, I found myself driving back toward the lakefront house, the same road I had taken 100 times growing up. The same turns, the same quiet stretch of trees that used to feel comforting. Now, every mile felt heavier, like I was moving closer to something I couldn't undo. I told myself I was just going to collect my things. That was the excuse, the safe version of the truth. But deep down, I knew why I was really going back. I needed proof. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still overcast, casting everything in a dull, muted light. When I turned into the long driveway lined with old oak trees, something immediately felt wrong. There were cars, not just one or two, but 3 sleek luxury sedans parked near the front entrance, their polished surfaces reflecting the gray sky. They didn't belong there. Not in a place that, just days ago, had been filled with quiet mourning. My stomach tightened. I parked farther down the drive than usual, instinctively wanting to avoid being seen right away. As I stepped out of the car, the air felt different, charged, almost, like something was already in motion. I walked toward the house slowly, my boots crunching against the gravel. The front door was slightly ajar, and voices drifted out low, professional, unfamiliar. I pushed the door open. Inside, the house no longer felt like home. The warmth was gone, the softness was gone, even the silence was gone. In its place was something else entirely. Karen stood in the center of the living room, her posture straight, her expression polished into something that almost resembled charm. She was speaking to a group of men in expensive suits, gesturing toward the windows, the fireplace, the high ceilings, like she was selling a product, not standing in the place where our parents had built a life. It didn't take long for the realization to hit me. She wasn't just planning to sell the house. She was already doing it. My chest tightened, my heartbeat quickening as I stepped further inside. One of the men glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to Karen, as if I were nothing more than a minor interruption. But Karen noticed. Of course she did. Her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before disappearing completely. She excused herself quickly and crossed the room toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, grabbing my arm before I could say anything. Her grip was tight, almost painful, as she pulled me toward the hallway, away from the others. "I told you not to interfere." I pulled my arm free, forcing myself to stay calm even though my pulse was racing. "You gave me 24 hours, I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm here to get my things." Her eyes narrowed, studying me carefully, like she was trying to read something beneath the surface. For a moment, I thought she might push further, might question me, might see through the thin layer of composure I was holding together. But then she glanced back toward the living room. The investors, her opportunity, her priority. She exhaled sharply, her irritation barely contained. "Fine," she muttered. "Stay upstairs. Don't come down. And don't talk to anyone." Her tone wasn't just a warning, it was a command. I gave a small nod, pretending compliance. "Good," she said, already turning away. "Don't ruin this for me." I watched her walk back into the living room, her expression shifting instantly back into that smooth, professional smile as she resumed her presentation, her voice rising just enough to be heard again. I didn't go upstairs. Not right away. Instead, I waited. I stood in the hallway, listening, watching the rhythm of her movements, the way she positioned herself between the guests and the deeper parts of the house. She was controlling the space, guiding them carefully, making sure they saw what she wanted them to see, which meant there were things she didn't want them to see. And those were exactly the things I needed. When her attention was fully absorbed again, I moved, quietly, carefully. I slipped toward the staircase and made my way up, my footsteps light against the carpet. At the top, I didn't turn toward my old bedroom like I had said I would. I turned left, toward my father's study. The door creaked softly as I pushed it open, and for a moment, everything else faded. The room still smelled like him. Old books, leather, a faint trace of pipe tobacco that clung to the air like a memory that refused to leave. The desk was exactly as he had left it, papers stacked neatly, pens aligned, everything in its place. My chest tightened, but I didn't let myself linger. I didn't have time. I moved straight to the painting above the desk, a landscape of the lake at sunset. I remembered, as a child, watching him once lift it slightly, revealing something hidden behind it. At the time, it had felt like a secret. Now, it felt like a chance. My fingers traced along the frame until I found the small latch. I pressed it. The painting shifted forward slightly. Behind it was a shallow wall safe, locked. My heart sank for a second, but then I noticed something else. Tucked into the narrow space between the safe and the wall was a small leather-bound notebook. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. It was worn, the edges softened with use. When I opened it, the pages were filled with my father's handwriting notes, numbers, small entries that seemed ordinary at first glance. But as I flipped through them, the tone began to change. The handwriting grew less steady, the entries more urgent. Karen requested another $50,000. I froze. I turned the page. Bank called about unauthorized withdrawal. My pulse quickened. Another page. Losses. Investments not disclosed. And then, written more heavily, almost pressed into the paper. Cryptocurrency account significant deficit. The words blurred for a moment as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just about inheritance. This wasn't just about greed. Karen was in trouble. Financial trouble. The kind that doesn't go away quietly. The kind that demands quick solutions. Desperate solutions. I flipped another page, my breath catching as the entries became more fragmented, more frantic. She says she needs more time, claims she can recover losses, concerned about access to accounts. I closed the notebook slowly, my mind racing. This was motive. Clear. Concrete. Damning. Karen hadn't just wanted the house. She needed it. Needed the money, the assets, the control. And if she was desperate enough, I didn't need to finish that thought. I already knew where it led. A sudden sound from the hallway snapped me back to reality. Footsteps. Close. Too close. My heart leapt into my throat. Karen. I didn't think I reacted. I shoved the notebook into my bag, moving quickly, but as quietly as I could. My eyes darted around the room, checking for anything out of place, anything that might reveal I had been there. The footsteps paused just outside the study door. For a split second, everything stopped. Then they moved again, past the door. My body sagged slightly with relief, but I didn't let it slow me down. I slipped out of the study, closing the door carefully behind me, and moved down the hallway in the opposite direction. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. Now, I made my way downstairs, keeping my head low, my movements controlled. The voices in the living room were louder now, more animated. Karen was still talking, still selling, still pushing. I didn't look at her. I didn't stop. I walked straight out the front door, my pace steady until I reached my car. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. I got inside, locking the doors immediately, my hands gripping the steering wheel as my chest rose and fell rapidly. The notebook sat in my bag, heavier than it should have been, not just because of what it contained, but because of what it meant. The recording wasn't an isolated moment. It was part of something bigger, something planned, something driven by desperation. I stared out at the house for a moment, the windows reflecting the dull sky, hiding everything that had happened inside. Karen wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to survive. And people like that, they don't stop. They don't hesitate. They push until there's nothing left in their way. I started the engine, my hands still trembling slightly. Because now, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. This wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about staying ahead of someone who would do anything to keep it buried. And I had just taken something she couldn't afford to lose. The days that followed felt stretched thin, like time itself was holding its breath. I didn't go back to the house. I barely left my apartment at all. Every sound outside my door made my heart jump. Every unknown number on my phone made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was awareness. The kind that settles into your bones when you realize you've stepped into something bigger than grief. The recorder sat on my coffee table. The notebook stayed hidden in my bag. Together, they formed a truth that was almost complete but not strong enough yet. Janice understood that before I even said it out loud. "We need someone who saw it," she said one evening, pacing slowly across my living room while I sat curled on the couch. "Someone who can connect everything, what she did financially and what she did medically." I nodded, my fingers tracing the edge of a cushion absently. "There was someone," I said after a moment. "The nurse, Mrs. Elena. She took care of Mom and Dad for years." Janice stopped. "What happened to her?" "She disappeared," I replied quietly. "Karen fired her about a month before Dad died. No explanation, just gone." Janice's eyes sharpened immediately. "Then that's not a coincidence." "No, it wasn't." The next few days became a blur of quiet investigation. Janice made calls, checked old contacts, searched through anything she could find. I helped where I could, though my focus kept slipping, pulled back again and again to the sound of my father's voice on that recording. It took time, longer than I wanted, but eventually, Janice found her. A small address on the outskirts of the city, a place far removed from the warmth and comfort she used to have at our home. We went early in the morning. The sky was still overcast, a light rain tapping softly against the windshield as we drove. Neither of us spoke much. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't make the moment heavier. When we arrived, the building looked worn down, the paint peeling in places, the windows dull and tired. It didn't feel like somewhere Mrs. Elena belonged. But then again, neither did any of this. We climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, the hallway dim and quiet. When we found her door 4B, I hesitated. My hand hovered just inches from the wood. What if she refused? What if she was too scared? Or worse, what if we were too late? Janice placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "We're here," she said softly. I nodded and knocked. Once, twice. Silence. Then, a faint sound. The click of a lock turning, but not opening, just securing. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "Mrs. Elena, it's Meredith." No response. I pressed my hand lightly against the door. "I know you're in there. Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to talk to you." Still nothing. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe she really was too afraid. But then I thought of my father, of his voice, of that recording, and something inside me refused to give up. "She heard him," I said quietly, my voice trembling, despite my effort to keep it steady. "And I think she hurt you too. But I won't let her do it again. Not to you, not to anyone." There was a long pause. So long I thought she might not respond at all. Then, the sound of the lock turning again. Slowly. The door opened just a few inches. Mrs. Elena stood there, barely recognizable from the woman I remembered. Her face looked thinner, older, her eyes rimmed with red, like sleep had become something distant. She studied me carefully, her expression filled with caution and fear. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I know," I replied, "but I had to come." Her gaze flickered to Janice, then back to me. "If she finds out—" "She won't," Janice said firmly. "And even if she does, you won't be alone this time." Mrs. Elena hesitated. Then, slowly, she opened the door wider. We stepped inside. The apartment was small, cluttered with boxes that looked like they had never been fully unpacked. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place someone was hiding in. She sat down on the edge of a worn sofa, her hands twisting together in her lap. I sat across from her, my heart pounding in my chest. "I need to know what happened," I said gently. "The night Dad got worse." Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then her shoulders began to shake. "She took the medication," Mrs. Elena whispered. "She told me not to give it to him." My breath caught. "What do you mean, took it?" "She removed it from the cabinet," Elena continued, her voice trembling. "Said she was managing everything now, that I was no longer in charge of his care." "That doesn't make any sense," I said, my voice tightening. "She said if I interfered." Elena's voice broke. "If I called anyone, she would report me, say I was stealing, that I was negligent. She said she would make sure I lost my license, that I would go to jail." My hands curled into fists. "She threatened you," I said quietly. Elena nodded, tears slipping down her face. I didn't know what to do. I tried to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen. She just stood there, watching him struggle. The room felt smaller, heavier. "She stood in the doorway," Elena continued, her voice barely audible now, "and told me to leave the room." I closed my eyes for a moment, the image forming too clearly in my mind. When I opened them again, I reached into my bag. "I need you to hear something," I said softly. I placed the recorder on the table between us and pressed play. The static filled the room. Then my father's voice. The reaction was immediate. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "That's him," she whispered. "That's exactly how he sounded." Karen's voice followed. Cold, controlled, unmistakable. By the time the recording ended, Elena was crying openly, her shoulders shaking with the weight of everything she had been holding in. "She knew," Elena said through her tears. "She knew what would happen if he didn't get his medication." Janice leaned forward slightly. "Would you be willing to say that? Officially?" Elena hesitated. Fear flickered across her face again, but this time, it didn't stay. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I will." Relief hit me so suddenly it almost made me dizzy. We had it. Not just suspicion. Not just fragments. But a connection. A witness. Truth that could stand in a room and be heard. As we stood to leave, a small sense of hope began to take shape, fragile, but real. But it didn't last long. As we stepped outside, Janice's phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen, and her expression changed instantly. "What is it?" I asked. She turned the phone toward me. An image. A digital flyer. My breath caught. "Private cash auction," I read slowly. Invitation only, Wednesday. The location listed beneath it made my stomach drop. Our house. Karen wasn't waiting. She wasn't slowing down. She was accelerating. She's trying to sell it before anything can stop her, Janice said, her voice tense. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. If she succeeded, if she sold the house, then everything, every piece of evidence, every memory, every chance to stop her could disappear with it. I looked back toward the building behind us, then down at the phone again. We don't have time, I said. Janice shook her head. No, we don't. A heavy silence settled between us. Then I took a slow breath, steadying myself. Then we stop her, I said, because now this wasn't just about proving what she had done. It was about preventing what she was about to do next. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't just afraid. I was ready. Wednesday arrived faster than I was ready for. The morning felt unnaturally quiet, like the world was holding its breath before something broke. I stood by the window of my apartment, watching a thin layer of clouds drift across the pale Michigan sky, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. For a moment, I barely recognized myself, the same face, the same eyes, but something behind them had changed. Fear was still there, but it wasn't in control anymore. Janice picked me up just after noon. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. There was nothing left to plan. We had already gone over everything the night before. The recorder, the ledger, Mrs. Elena's testimony, the emergency legal request that Janice had helped push through with one of her contacts. All we could do now was act. As we turned into the long driveway of the lakefront house, the scene in front of us confirmed everything we feared. Luxury cars lined both sides of the drive, sleek black sedans, polished SUVs, even a couple of low sports cars that looked like they belonged in a showroom rather than outside a home filled with memories. Valet attendants moved quickly between them, opening doors, guiding guests, creating the illusion of an exclusive, high-end event. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a showing. This was a performance. Karen's performance. Janice parked near the end of the driveway, far enough to avoid attention, but close enough that we wouldn't have to walk through the entire crowd. Two men stood waiting near the gate, plain clothes, but unmistakably official. The officers. One of them gave a small nod as we approached. "We'll follow your lead," he said quietly. "Once you signal." I nodded, my throat tight. This was it. We walked toward the house together, each step feeling heavier than the last. The front doors were wide open, and as soon as we stepped inside, the atmosphere hit me. Laughter, conversation, the soft clink of glasses. It felt wrong, completely, painfully wrong. Like stepping into a stranger's version of my life. Karen stood in the center of the living room, exactly where I expected her to be. She was dressed in a tailored white suit, her hair perfectly styled, her posture confident and controlled. She looked successful, composed, like someone who had everything under control. If you didn't know the truth, you would believe her. That was the terrifying part. She was speaking to a small group of investors, her voice smooth and practiced. "This property is being offered below market value for a quick, immediate closing," she explained, gesturing toward the wide windows overlooking the lake. "All documentation is prepared. We can finalize everything today." Today? She wasn't even trying to hide her urgency. My pulse quickened. Janice glanced at me briefly, her expression steady. I gave a small nod. Now, we stepped forward together, moving into the open space of the room. The shift was immediate. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Eyes followed us as we walked in, uninvited and unmistakably out of place. Karen saw me. For a split second, just a fraction of a second, her expression broke. Shock. Then fear. And then, just as quickly, it hardened into anger. "Security," she snapped, her voice cutting through the room. "Get her out. She's trespassing." A few guards hesitated, uncertain, their eyes flicking past me toward the officers standing just behind us. Confusion spread through the room like a ripple. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Karen's eyes narrowed immediately. "What are you doing?" she demanded, stepping toward me. I didn't answer. I tapped the screen, connecting to the house's integrated speaker system, a detail she had overlooked in her rush to sell everything. The small indicator light on the central console blinked. Connected. A faint hum filled the room. Then, static. Sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. The conversations died completely, and then my father's voice filled the house. "Please, Karen, it hurts." The effect was immediate. People froze. Some turned toward the speakers. Others glanced at each other, confusion quickly giving way to discomfort. Karen lunged forward. "Turn that off," she hissed, reaching for my phone. Janice stepped between us, blocking her path. Then Karen's voice echoed through the room. "Cold. Controlled. Sign the papers, you'll get the medication after." The shift in the room was palpable. The investors, the same people who had been nodding along just moments before, began to step back. Their expressions changed, curiosity replaced by unease by something closer to alarm. One man quietly set his glass down on a nearby table. Another closed his folder without a word. The illusion Karen had built was collapsing, and she knew it. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she snapped, her composure cracking. "This is completely out of context. She's manipulating." Her words were cut off by her own voice, continuing from the recording. "If you don't sign, I walk out and I take the medication with me." Silence. Heavy? Absolute. Karen stopped moving. For a moment, she just stood there, her face pale, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for something, anything, to regain control. But it was already gone. The officers stepped forward then, their presence calm but undeniable. One of them held out a document. "We have an emergency court order to freeze all assets related to this property," he said firmly. "Miss Karen, we need you to come with us." A murmur spread through the room. Karen's composure shattered completely. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising, almost frantic now. "You can't do this. This is my property. He signed it over to me." "Under questionable circumstances," the officer replied evenly. The investors didn't wait for more. One by one, they began to leave quickly, quietly, without confrontation. The room emptied faster than I thought possible, the energy shifting from interest to avoidance in a matter of seconds. Karen turned toward them, her expression desperate now. "Wait, this isn't what it looks like." But no one stopped. No one listened. Within minutes, the house was nearly empty. Just us. And the truth, Karen stood in the center of the room, her shoulders tense, her breathing uneven. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the confidence she had worn so carefully just moments before. "You did this," she said, her voice low, filled with something between anger and disbelief. I met her gaze. For the first time, I didn't look away. "No," I said quietly. "You did." The officers moved closer, guiding her toward the door. She resisted at first, pulling back, shaking her head, her voice rising into something sharper, more desperate. "This was mine. He promised it to me. I deserved it." The words echoed in the empty room, hollow and broken. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. As they led her out, her voice faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the house, the same house she had tried to strip, to sell, to erase. And for the first time since all of this began, it felt still, not peaceful, not yet. But still, I stood there for a long moment, my eyes drifting toward the windows, the lake beyond them calm and endless. Janice stepped beside me, her presence steady, grounding. "It's over," she said softly. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest loosening just slightly. "Not yet," I replied, because I knew this wasn't the end. There would be court hearings, testimonies, questions that would dig deeper than I wanted to go. But the hardest part, the moment where truth could have been buried forever, that part was over. And as I stood there, in the house that no longer felt like mine, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Relief. Not because everything was fixed, but because the truth had survived. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. Stories like this stay with us long after the final scene fades, not just because of the twists or the confrontation, but because of what they reveal about human nature. This wasn't only a story about inheritance or revenge, it was about how easily trust can be broken, and how courage often comes from the quietest people when they're pushed to the edge. Meredith didn't fight because she wanted power or money. She fought because the truth mattered, because dignity mattered, and because love, real love, doesn't disappear, even when someone tries to burn it away. And maybe that's the question this story leaves us with. If you were in her place, would you have had the strength to stand up, even when everything seemed stacked against you? If this story moved you, or made you think a little deeper about the people and values in your own life, I'd love for you to stay with us on this journey. Please consider liking, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing to Revenge Drama House. Your support helps bring more powerful, emotional stories like this to life, stories that remind us that even in the darkest moments, truth has a way of finding its voice.